Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this MEF briefing on the future of IoT Global Connectivity. I'm Andrew Parkin-White. I'm MEF's advisor on mobile IoT, and mobile IoT is one of MEF's programs. And at MEF, we aim to provide insight, impact, and interaction with the ecosystem. And we work through a series of working groups, knowledge sharing initiatives, and ecosystem interactions. So if you've got any questions about MEF, please contact one of the team. You can contact me on andrew@mobileecosystemforum.com. So today's webinar is going to be running for about 45 minutes. It'll be recorded, so you can share it with your colleagues through the email that will be sent after the session. And there'll be a blog with links to follow up after the webinar. Very importantly, at the bottom of the screen, you'll find a Q&A button, and you can submit questions throughout the session. And please do ask questions throughout. We appreciate your interaction and views. So going back to the theme of today's webinar, the future of global IoT connectivity, MEF has been doing research along with its members and some other organizations into how the connectivity market is going to be evolving in the next few years. And I'm delighted that a number of members from MEF took part in this, so namely Pod Group, BICS, ZARIOT, JT Global, and Tata Communications, and they're all represented on the call today. The research for the report, which you can download on the MEF website, took part between July and October this year and was a combination of telephone interviews with organizations and desk research. So I'd now like to hand over to the individual panelists to let them introduce themselves. So first of all, we have Amy.
Hi, Andrew. Yes, thank you. And hello, everybody. It's great to be joining you today. I'm Amy Garcia from Pod Group. I'm the marketing director at Pod Group. And Pod is a global IoT connectivity provider. We have offices in 6 countries worldwide, and we provide connectivity to enterprises of all sizes across a wide variety of different sectors. So it's great to be with you all today. Thank you, Andrew.
Fernando.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm Fernando Llobregat. I work at BICS as head of sales for IoT for enterprises. And BICS, for those who do not know us, we are a connectivity provider, being a main partner of mobile operators, and we are offering to enterprises international connectivity service based on our different roaming agreements with our mobile operator partners. So happy to be here. I'm looking forward for the questions, I hope challenging from the audience.
Thank you, Fernando. And now Graham.
Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Hart Ives. I'm head of IoT sales here at JT Global. JT Telecom. We've been in the IoT market now for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, along those lines. And we've grown quite a substantial business based on all our roaming agreements in the very small island of Jersey. Once you're sold to the 10,000 people on Jersey, a couple of SIMs each, you've got to go somewhere else, and we went into the IoT space, and thankfully we did, the way the market's grown. So nice to meet everybody.
Thank you, Graham. And last but not least, Ben.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks. I'm Ben Bannister. Hello, everyone. I'm from Tata Communications. I head up product marketing for mobility and IoT services. And Tata is a global mobility platform and connectivity provider. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Ben. We were also expecting Stuart Mitchell of ZARIOT to be on the call, but he's having a few technical difficulties in joining us. So I'm hoping that he will be able to join at some point during today's conversation. So the research we undertook looked at 4 main areas. The first one was really about market development. So how the market is growing, what are the main drivers for IoT global connectivity, and which segments and geographies are offering the greatest opportunities. In the second area, we looked at network and technologies and the platforms that support IoT solutions, and looked at what's available now and how will they evolve in the future. The third area was looking at the competitive environment. So how's it developing, and what strategies are communication service providers adopting to address these opportunities, and what are the challenges they're facing when addressing these? And the final area was how customer service providers can best monetize global IoT connectivity opportunity. So by way of scene setting, I always like to start with how big is the market and how it's growing and what does the value chain look like. And I think the first thing to note is there are multiple forecasts from many different analysts about the size of the IoT market. And one research firm that drew my attention was Transformer Insights. And they were forecasting that in 2019, there were around 7.6 billion active IoT connections globally. And they estimate that by 2030, the IoT market's going to be worth around $1.5 trillion with over 25 billion active devices. And to put that into context, they're estimating that there's a compound annual growth rate of around 11%. Clearly, we're more interested in the mobile IoT side of things, given that IoT connectivity can come from a number of different types of networks. And their estimates are that connections over cellular will grow from 1.2 billion in 2019 to 4.7 billion in 2030. So one of the questions that we tried to flesh out during the course of the research was, how much is connectivity worth in the overall market? And although there's some variation by application, by geography, by segment, it seems to be that people come around to the figure of 10% of overall value for connectivity in the value chain, spanning devices, platforms, systems integration, and tools like analytics and security. So I'd now like to start the discussion properly. And the first thing I'd like to cover with the panel today is which segments of the market are offering the best opportunities for global IoT connectivity, and what is driving the demand. And I think I'm going to put that question, first of all, to Ben.
Okay, let me come off mute. So it's interesting that obviously the forecasts, I don't know if they took the COVID situation into consideration or not, but obviously at the moment, certain aspects of, for example, the airline and aviation industry have been significantly negatively impacted by the coronavirus. We tend to focus on anything that moves, so transportation, automotive, etc., etc. The automotive industry has also obviously been impacted in terms of new vehicle sales by COVID. In terms of the projects, however, it doesn't seem to have damped the interest of our customers. So the projects that we're working on have continued, albeit perhaps at a slightly delayed pace. But certainly, I think we would see vehicles, any vehicular traffic, be it cars, trucks, buses, etc., are a strong area for growth. And I think that is one element. And then the other element, particularly associated with the coronavirus, obviously, is the growth in medical equipment and anything to do with connected medical devices. So those seem to be the two areas that have the most growth impact from our perspective.
Thank you, Ben. Amy, would you like to come in here and give your view on where you see demand coming from?
Yes, I mean, I think I would echo Ben in that, the effects of COVID have obviously had impacts on different sectors. So again, healthcare, we've seen, the need for connected healthcare products both to monitor patients remotely and to track people during the pandemic to prevent the spread of infection. And I think that's also translated to other sectors. So supply chain, for example, where you think of the example of transportation of medicines or vaccines at a specific temperature that need to be constantly monitored, and that's an area where obviously there's growth. And I think in other areas, manufacturing is one where we're seeing particularly rapid growth, with the digitization of the manufacturing industry as a result of Industry 4.0. And obviously that's combined with the decreased costs of sensors and hardware, and there's a lot of drivers there that are pushing that industry forward. And I think that's enabling applications like predictive maintenance in smart factories, where there's interesting use cases that significantly decrease cost and increase efficiency. And those are some of the main drivers.
Thank you, Amy. Fernando, would you like to come in there?
Yes. I mean, I think they have. Amy and Ben has covered the most of the topics. Just to add, because yes, those are the segments we are seeing. I mean, everything linked on our side, especially to logistics and industry. This is something that is really ramping up, and it has been quite interesting because we had this kind of interesting trend the first month of the year. Then everything stopped, and I think that's clear for everyone. But it's true that in the last month, especially in industry, we have seen already an interesting take-up, and especially a growing demand from our customers in Asia, in manufacturing, where we see that, well, they are already foreseeing that the economy, if everything goes well, will be back to normal, and the demand will continue growing. So we are somehow seeing interest and business raising on the manufacturing side of the world, if I can say, and we hope this is going to spread to the rest in the months to come.
Thank you. Graham, would you like to come in there? And I know that you have a slightly different view on the market demand.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on the basis, we've seen a lot of demand as we've seen the impact of COVID, a lot of demand for alternative transport, so things like e-bikes. And micromobility scooters, stuff like that. We've seen quite a lot of demand for that as demand obviously dropped when nobody's in the cities, but I think what we're seeing is more cities are creating more cycle routes, for example, and putting more e-bikes out there. And so as people don't want to go back onto public transport. So we're seeing quite a strong demand there. And in terms of other, we tend to see people with the same sort of problems rather than the same verticals. We've attempted a vertical approach to the industry, and what we actually found out was we pulled away from that and just went, well, actually everybody's broadly got the same problem. Let's find those people with those problems and resolve those problems for them. So it's that having the connectivity to your device, going back to Amy's point about the falling in computing power, the dropping pricing of sensors. And those have come together nicely over the last 2 years, I think, to facilitate a lot of growth in the IoT connectivity market.
Thank you, Graham. And I'd like to welcome Stuart Mitchell of ZARIOT to the call. He had a few technical gremlins in trying to get in. So before I put the question to you, Stuart, could you just give a brief introduction of who you are, your role, and what ZARIOT is doing in IoT? You're on mute, Stuart.
I was going to say, Andrew, I'm never ever coming to another one of these calls. I don't remember last time my internet connection dropped out. This time I couldn't get in. You either change to Zoom or I don't come. I'm kidding, of course. I'm always happy to support you. So I'm Stuart. I'm Chief Evangelist and Head of Product with ZARIOT. ZARIOT is a company wholly owned by Cellusys. We are an IoT SIM card provider with a special focus on security. And I'm driving us forward towards a zero trust security approach, led primarily through our signaling security solution.
Thank you. And it's the same question to you before we move on to the next area. So where are you seeing demand coming from and what's driving the demand?
I mean, echoing a lot of what everyone else has said, really, but as always happens when you go last, but, transportation, asset tracking, environmental. I think COVID is obviously the big subject on the table at the moment, and what we've seen is a few companies kind of retrenching, going back to the drawing board, putting some plans in place for the future. And I think, like most of us around the table, we're looking at the roaring 20s to come, where demand will begin to explode over the coming years.
Thank you. So I'd now like to shift our attention to a second topic. And the market, there's quite hefty growth in the early years of some of the analysts' forecasts, and certain geographies are emerging as key markets at present. So I'd like to put to the panel, where do you see the best geographical opportunities? And apologies to the people going last that we'll probably have covered off you want to say beforehand. So I think I'll start with Graham this time and see where you're seeing the best, the main geographical opportunities at present.
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of demand from the Asia-Pac region. We've seen an increase in inquiries from that region. Customers either building there and selling in other parts of the world, so the manufacturing, plastic manufacturing and shipping, or actually developing new business opportunities over there. So for us, it's been a very strong part of the world, followed probably by either Africa or Latin America. Africa's a very large untapped market around the SADC region that we are hopefully addressing. So those are our two main regions of growth we're seeing over the next couple of years.
Fernando, would you like to come in there? You're on mute, Fernando.
Now it should be okay. For us, we are really seeing the demand growing up in the Asia Pacific area, as Graham said. This is the main vector of growth we are seeing right now in terms of demand generation. Then, of course, we are seeing, what is delivered in those countries. Then it really makes use of the connectivity all over the world. And here we are seeing most of those deployments taking place in Europe and the United States. But in terms of demand generation, we are seeing it a lot in Asia Pac, as Graham says, even more than in Africa. In Africa, you have, at least what we see, you have a lot of generation, but okay, it's mostly for let's say, for local uses, whereas in Asia, when the demand is generated there, is to be used really worldwide, from the perspective that those are most of them manufacturing customers who produce there, but then they deploy worldwide. So yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that's how we see it today.
Thank you, Fernando. Stuart, would you like to add anything?
Sure, yeah. I mean, as in common with the other members of the panel, really, Western Europe, US, very, very mature markets. There continues to be ongoing business there. The real growth and the real opportunities, I think, will come from the emerging markets, potentially from Asia, Middle East, Africa as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll hand over to Amy now.
Yes, no surprises here, I'm afraid, Andrew. I mean, Asia, obviously a huge growth market at the moment. I think, we're seeing, due to the location of many of the hardware manufacturers there, the OEMs, particularly in China, their requirement for global connectivity as well as they expand outside the Asian market. And, obviously they're realizing the benefits as well of working with an MVNO that can provide access to multiple carriers via one platform. And again, we're seeing very rapid growth as well in emerging markets like Latin America. In terms of sectors, I mean, in that region, particularly banking and finance is particularly strong, I think, as well as, tracking telematics applications. I think banking, finance, point of sale is growing quite quickly in LATAM. And again, Africa, tracking telematics applications are the ones where we're seeing the major growth at the moment.
Thank you. And Ben, finally.
Yeah, so again, really not any surprise. Asia clearly is a very big market. I think the only thing I would say, because we're Tata, we're an Indian company, we separate Asia Pacific from India. So for us, South Asia is a separate business region. Within India, there's actually quite a lot of activity going on, particularly in the smart city space. also in smart grid and smart meter space, and also in automotive. So it's interesting what some of the other panelists have said. You know, Africa, we think of Africa as a developing market. We tend to think of India as a developing market and developed market in some cases, but there's a lot of interesting use cases going on in India, which I think will perhaps be a reflection of what might happen in Africa or the Middle East or Central Asia regions in future. So I think that's India is quite a good market to watch, just to see how some of the other developing markets actually come along.
Yeah, and I think the consistent theme that came out when I was writing up the research was very strong markets in developed Asia, North America, and to some extent Europe. But over time, we were expecting, or we are expecting, to see that some of the large markets that you've mentioned, you know, developing markets in Africa, albeit for maybe simpler IoT applications, and Latin America becoming very important. And what seemed to come out was it was a function of market development over time, that markets with a greater GDP, more affordability for these services would start to adopt first, and then the growth would subsequently pass to less well-developed markets over time. But certainly in the next few years, those markets you've mentioned are all going to be very significant markets. So,
Just to add on that, it's for example, the United States, just what you mentioned about the GDP, is per se a market that is going to be very, very big. But I think because of the way most of our companies are positioned, maybe it's not where you have most of the demand generation today. Not because it's not an important market, but maybe because the devices or the ideas are not coming from there yet. But as if I can say, of an inbound market in terms of receiving and growth for IoT, I mean, US, I mean, it's what, 300 million people? I mean, mathematically, there will be a lot of IoT business there. Something like what Ben mentioned about India. It's a question of GDP / population gain. But today, I think most of us see the demand from Asia because, well, this is the manufacturing countries in the world.
Thank you, Fernando. So I'm going to look at a different area now, and you're all active in IoT, the IoT market. And I'd like to ask you what you're finding the main challenges for communication service providers in developing global IoT connectivity solutions to serve these segments of markets, and how a CSP can best position for growth in these markets. So I will first ask that question of Graham.
Yeah, I think there's a number of key challenges. First is a protectionism. You're seeing protectionism from a number of countries, or a number of operators within countries. Places like Turkey is the obvious one, where they've shut down permanent roaming. Brazil's the other classic example. You're seeing an increase, I think, in the American operators who are increasingly becoming more strict with the devices that they will allow on their network. And then more broadly, you're seeing the large operator groups, I think to a certain extent justifiably, saying, well, hang on, this IoT stuff isn't really suitable for roaming. Roaming wasn't built for IoT. Roaming was built for consumers using large amounts of data, not for using 5 meg for tracking a truck or a cat or something. So we're going to start imposing a monthly recurring charge on any IoT devices. So maybe splitting that roaming between IoT and consumer. So those are the kind of the key challenges I see in going forward to continue the connectivity journey that a lot of people have started on.
Right, thank you. I'd like to bring in Ben on that particular point, because I know he's got a few ideas on the nature of IoT and how it's challenging for CSPs?
Yeah, well, I think Andrew, if we go back to the transformer data and the forecasts, and actually transformers forecast reflects a lot of the other forecasts I've seen. Only about 20% of the device connectivity is going to be cellular. Okay, so the rest is going to be quite fragmented. Wi-Fi, LoRa, Sigfox, etc., etc. The issue is obviously the cellular network providers, the CSPs, are more focused around providing cellular connectivity because that's their business. Are they really interested in having to both provide connectivity and potentially invest in infrastructure to manage other forms of connectivity? So I think that really is one of the challenges. Graham already mentioned the issue of regulation, and I think different regions, we talked about Africa a little bit before this, very heavily regulated markets tend to kind of present challenges and difficulties associated with non-regulated connectivity or unlicensed connectivity. I think that's another issue. Not all, we kind of, I think we're tending to focus on kind of roaming and global cellular IoT connectivity. Obviously not by any means all of the applications that, associated with roaming. Amy mentioned this. A lot of the industrial applications have nothing to do with roaming whatsoever. And again, what the companies in those spaces are going to be looking for are low power devices in the main, which obviously are unlicensed spectrum. So one of the things that the operators or the CSPs have an opportunity in is this concept of private LTE and private connectivity. So that's one thing. But the other challenge is really associated with, do they really want to become kind of system integrators to put a whole bunch of other technologies which are not really their core focus together to provide a service? And I think that's going to be one of the challenges for CSPs.
Thank you, Ben. Fernando, have you got a view on the challenges you're seeing day to day in growing the market?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of challenges that we are seeing, I agree with Raham. It's more about the regulatory environment that gets more and more complicated, and it's funny because I don't know who mentioned that. I think it was Amy. On one side, we have the regulatory environment becoming more complicated, and on the other side, we have lower cost of modems, of sensors. So let's say that one of the old problems we had, which was the cost of the devices, of the sensors, is becoming less of an issue. But now when we have those devices ready to be communicating everywhere in the world, well, there are some constraints in terms of what we can do from a roaming perspective. So that's something that somehow it's interesting and makes sometimes our life more complicated because the demand is there. And then from a CSP perspective, I fully agree with what Ben said. And I think that for CSPs, the real challenge is to start delivering complete solutions. So that I think one of the persons in the Q&A, he just asked, well, who could I contact if I want to set up a solution for a warehouse? So, well, ideally, an CSP could be the right partner for that because they can bring in the different companies who can deliver a complete solution, and this could be a way for a CSP to somehow go up into the value chain. So from a CSP perspective, I think that moving up in this value chain is the big challenge, because if not, it's all about connectivity. And you said at the beginning, Andrew, it's only 10%, if we are generous, of the total value. So I don't think the big business for CSPs is there.
No, I mean, certainly the other 90% is attractive. So we do expect people to try to move up the value chain. I'll bring in Stuart now to give his perspective on the challenges, or do we have any challenges day to day?
I mean, as an MVNO rather than a CSP, we tend to float across different mobile operators. And if I can't get the pricing I want from Graham, I'll go talk to Fernando. But I think one of the big challenges that we see is, particularly in the emerging markets, the model has traditionally been built on top of acquiring a European IMSI and use roaming routes as people have talked about. When you're going to try and work in the emerging markets, you really don't have pricing that's appropriate to the local market. And I think a lot of use cases are being held back by that. A lot of solutions are being held back by that. And that's one of the challenges that we see, is trying to figure out how to unlock that conundrum of getting cost-effective to the local market connectivity in some of the areas that we're looking to exploit.
Yeah, and this kind of race to the bottom for tariffs that we've seen from some organisations. I know a couple of people that we spoke to said, that's not a strategy that's viable long term, and as you say, the value is in going up the value chain rather than going down it.
It's more of almost like a two-tier market right now. In the mature markets, you have that race to the bottom, but that's not happening in Africa. That's not happening in South America. That's not happening in the Middle East, or, to my knowledge, Asia yet. Because, as I say, traditionally the industry has been built on European IMSIs or North American IMSIs, and roaming into those destinations is historically very expensive.
Yeah, and finally, I'll bring Amy in now to give her comments on this.
Yeah, I mean, I again, as Stuart said, we're looking at it more from an MVNO point of view. I think also, though, the fragmentation of the connectivity market, the 2G, 3G sunsets that have happened over recent years, the LPWAN technologies coming into play, that it causes complexities for our customers, and therefore it causes complexities for us as well. And I think, the thing is, with all the different applications that there are in the IoT, there's no one-size-fits-all technology, and so we need to be able to support multiple technologies and integrate them into one platform and enable them to coexist, so that our customers can use the technology that best suits their application. And I think that our approach is really to remain agnostic there, both in terms of operators and connectivity technologies, so that we can provide a path for our customers to future-proof their applications. And that's a challenge, but it's something that I think is necessary right now in the market. Thank
you, Amy. We did have a broad discussion during the course of the research on what's happening with network technologies and how they will evolve over the time and which technologies suit which applications. And it's echoing the views that that the panelists have provided today, that there is no one technology that will override. And yes, we'll see various technologies in existence, and we'll also see the 2G and 3G sunsets. And we do see the ongoing importance of GSMA-based technologies in terms of global IoT connectivity, or the cellular element of that. So I'd like to move our attention into a different area now, and talking about enterprise needs and what enterprises are looking for beyond, shall we say, simple connectivity. So put it in other terms, going beyond that 10% of the value that connectivity providers alone are addressing. So as Amy was last time, I'll let Amy go first and give her perspective on what she sees as enterprise needs beyond simple connectivity.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is obviously many of the traditional connectivity options weren't originally designed for the IoT, so Wi-Fi or traditional cellular networks. So enterprises have always needed more flexible connectivity options that are specific to their IoT applications. And, they're looking for additional value-added services to support their needs. So, for example, with a critical infrastructure type application, they need much more advanced security solutions like network monitoring and threat detection. And those are specific needs that they have for their application and their sector. And there's also, I think, recently, obviously, there's been a move by enterprises and OEMs towards offering subscription-based services. And I think many enterprises are not actually set up to manage or build that. So they need platforms that enable them to not only manage their connectivity, but also to build recurring revenue or to manage security, and to give them more control and visibility of their connectivity.
Thank you, Amy. I mean, it did seem to be a theme coming out through the course of the research that enterprises probably don't understand IoT sufficiently well enough to really be able to manage it themselves, and are looking to other providers, to third-party providers, to be able to do this for them. Yeah. Okay, Stuart, I think you'd like to come in at this point. You're on.
Absolutely. Yep. I think I'm going to pick up one of the points you said. You said, what can we offer that isn't just simple connectivity? And I think our role is to offer simple connectivity. We need to take away this complexity of 2G, 3G, 4G, NB-IoT, LTE-M, Cat1. We need to make it simple for our customers to simply build their solutions. We've got a wealth of experience in this market. We know which devices work and work well. We understand how to interface on the data side to various public cloud platforms. And we know what security measures need to be brought to play. So I think there's a really important role for us to play in guiding our customers through that, taking connectivity away from being a commodity and formulating it into a solution.
Yeah, Ben, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, so just to echo what Stuart said, I mean, we tend to work with customers who are actually pretty well versed in what they're looking for. Okay, but as Stuart said, they don't necessarily have expertise in cellular communications or whatever else the communications happens to be. So a lot of them are looking for ways to increase the value of the business, and if they can find ways to do that using IoT, that's fine. But they're also looking for ways to understand the information, and I think analytics, and we haven't really touched on it that much yet, but analytics, information management, how you can use that information to actually add value to your business, that's something that they need to understand. And actually, it's kind of heading towards data science. You could argue that our cellular IoT connectivity providers best place to actually be the people to do that. I don't know. So there's an awful lot of mileage, I would say, in what you can do with the data. And remember, with IoT, the vast majority of the data that's generated by IoT is not ever used or even looked at. So there's a huge mine of information which the enterprises don't tend to look at. And I think that understanding how they can harness that information and data, I think that's something that they are interested in. And the other side of it is obviously, a lot of them don't have traditional ESS OSS infrastructures. So they're looking for ways to actually derive value from the account management, the provisioning, the billing in a relationship with potentially with end customers of their own, what they can do and how they can control that sort of information. So I think the kind of area of information management is really the big interest from enterprises.
Thank you, Ben. Fernando, do you have a view?
Well, I mean, I think my colleagues have, let's say, gone already over the main points. I maybe would like to stress the integration part. We are getting more and more, let's say, interest from customers when we show them how easy it is to management in their business processes or in the applications that are at the end what they will see. So that in a certain way they can have their hand on the connectivity. They know with a lot of details what is going on, but on the other side, all is automated when it comes to provisioning, controlling the access, throttling, and this kind of let's say of activities that companies need. But this implies, and this is what Ben said at the beginning, that there is a certain maturity in the customers. And this is also where you see the difference. The customers who are, let's say, in their second or third evolution of their IoT systems, then they come to you, and they know what they want. At least from what I said about the integration, they know what they want. Whereas some others, well, it's still a learning process in terms of what do exactly they need when we talk about integration with their systems. So that's, let's say, one thing that we are seeing quite often when talking about when addressing enterprise for the IoT activity.
Thank you, Fernando. And finally, Graham.
It depends on what the enterprise is trying to achieve. I mean, Ben talked about adding value, but a lot of the time people want to reduce cost as well. So I think it really depends. I mean, if they're looking to reduce cost in the manufacturing process, what is PLTE? Something they want to talk about, I guess. If they're looking to add value, then they need that future proof. They need to know that the devices they're deploying will stay out there. The connectivity decisions they're making now will be valid for 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. I've seen customers who are absolutely gung-ho because they can save $3 or $5 on a modem because it's an LP1 technology only. Only to spend 6 months designing a product and relaunch it and realize there's no LP1 connectivity in the market they've gone for. So I think that enterprises need something, a trusted best friend almost, sometimes to say, that can speak honestly to them and not just sell to them. Have those discussions, ask those questions around why are you doing it, what are you doing it for, and what's your ultimate objective with this project.
Thank you, Graham. And we did look a fair bit when we were undertaking the research into how the competitive and commercial landscape is evolving over time. And I'd just like to pick up a question instead of asking the one that I had originally planned. And that is, how are providers, communication service providers, differentiating? Or is IoT connectivity commoditized from start to finish? So kind of open question. So how are people competing, and what are they achieving in terms of differentiation? I think I'll bring Stuart in for that one first.
I mean, people like ourselves are differentiating in terms of our security messaging that we're pushing very, very hard. We all have different ways of differentiating, whether it's the technical capabilities that we offer, whether it's the commercial flexibility that we can offer, whether it's the the wraparound care that someone like Tata Communications could offer, or the additional value adds on the OSS BSS that Pod Group could offer. I think we've all got different things to offer. To Graham's point, there's lots of different customers out there who want lots of different things, and yeah, I mean, there's a number of different aspects I think that that we've all got that we can provide to the market. Yeah,
Ben, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, so my personal view is that, I have said this before in various forums, is I don't actually think there is any such thing as the IoT market, okay? There are markets with people who want to buy services, and that could be the automotive market, or it could be the hospital market, or whatever it happens to be. So, just saying, how do we compete, with each other in IoT? How do the different platform providers or connectivity providers compete in IoT? I'm not sure that's really the right question, if you don't mind my saying so, Andrew. It's
absolutely not.
Different industries have different requirements. So if I'm running a bus company, yeah, my requirements are going to be very different to if I'm running I don't know, industrial manufacturing business, okay? And I think, the individual requirements associated with the bus company and the manufacturing business would reflect on the basis of the competition, if you like, or the differentiation. So we in Tata wouldn't necessarily address certain markets, because quite frankly, it just isn't worth us addressing those markets, because we know we can't add very much value to certain markets, whereas certain other markets, such as the automotive market, we can add a lot of value in. So, you know, our basis of competition, if you like, is based on the customers we're working with and the segments we're working with, rather than saying, you know, this is our proposition for IoT and BICS has its proposition for IoT and so on and so forth. That's not really how we operate.
Fine. Thank you for that, Ben. And if you could bring in Graham there.
Yeah, I'm picking up on Ben's point. Actually, conversely, we wouldn't go into the automotive market. We you know, we're a small, relatively, a player that probably a Ford or an Audi wouldn't really want to talk to. You know, the budgets that Tata can deploy on winning that type of business will probably be more than we earn in a year. So, you know, we very much like to stick to our little niches as well. And going back to the point about the question about the commoditization, no, I don't think it is. I think commoditization occurs when there's no differentiation, and when there's no differentiation on price, and there will always be someone cheaper than you. And if that's it's one of the first questions me and my team ask. If the first question we get asked is, "What's your price for this?" You really aren't going to be our customer, because then you will find somebody cheaper, wander off and go buy it from somebody else, and we'll focus on where we can add value and how we can support the customer over the lifetime of that project, not just on the saving a few cents on a megabyte here or there.
Yeah. And Fernando, your views, please.
Well, I think for us the differentiation is I mean, let's say it's a market, as with the figures that you say at the beginning, it's a growing market. So even in the use cases that Ben mentioned, like buses or, you know, industry, I think it's a growing cake, and still it's not yet as commoditized, and some people still think. But of course, it's gonna get there. I mean, today, when you address those use cases that I mean, Tata doesn't want to get into, in most of the cases, it's a race to the bottom in terms of prices, and then you differentiate with the capabilities in your platform and the services that you can deliver. That's it. We all know that there are many offers in the market which are really cheap. So somehow they are already, you know, setting the market price, and we need to try to find a way to counter that. I think also that when you talk about industry, and Amy, you mentioned it about security, well, there you can also find some room for differentiation, because this is not something that every company can put on the table. Let's say an end-to-end security, or some of, you know, the IP traffic control that you can offer. This is not something that if the customer needs, I mean, knows what he needs, maybe there is still some room to, you know, to move up a little bit in terms of value. But it will become harder, the differentiation, in the coming years. But right now, I think it's okay. It's a growing market. That's why we are all here. So competition is good anyhow. This is what keep us on our tour.
Yeah. And Amy, I'm going to actually throw in a supplementary question to you while you're on the question. It's really in the interest of time, because time is running away with us this webinar. So I'd like to ask you about the evolving and competitive landscape, but also what sort of organizations are really best placed to serve the IoT global connectivity market?
Yes, I mean, I think, you know, from an enterprise perspective, it's not traditionally been that easy for them to find the right connectivity providers. I mean, if you look at MNOs, you know, they provide, you know, control and visibility of the core network because they own the infrastructure and the spectrum, but they may be less flexible in terms of global coverage or specific products and services for an IoT application. I think MVNOs are, you know, they're well equipped to provide global coverage, especially if they're agnostic and they can add value by providing access to global networks and via one platform. So they tend to be more flexible, but in many cases, you know, they do lack that ownership and control of the network. So I think now it's interesting what's happening in the market with the disaggregation of the mobile network and the move towards eSIM and private cellular networks, there's a shift happening towards enterprise ownership of networks, particularly, as I say, private LTE. And that creates an opportunity, I think, for CSPs who can bring together the different players in the ecosystem and provide managed services to enterprises. And I think this goes back to what we were saying about the differentiation. Most enterprises don't have the in-house resources to manage the private cellular network, say. So they'll be looking to CSPs or service providers to give them that knowledge, that experience, and to work with them as a long-term technical partner. And I think the best place service providers will be able to provide connectivity seamlessly over both the private and the public spectrum, and be able to provide a platform to give the enterprise control of that network. And I think that's the shift that we're seeing in the market at the moment.
Thank you, Amy. So the last discussion point I have before we have a couple of questions, if I can ask you for a 20 to 30-second response to this question, which is rather unfair. And the question I'd like to cover is, what does it take for an organization, communication service provider, to be successful in IoT global connectivity and to monetize the opportunity? So I think I'll throw that to Fernando first of all.
Well, in 20 seconds, I would say flexibility from both a technical and commercial perspective. This is what you need today.
Flexibility, great.
Yeah.
So I'll ask the same question to Graham now.
I was going to say flexibility.
Say flexibility.
I'll also add reach. I think from where we sit in the value chain, it's having those the most number of networks access to, and the most number and the largest different types of access. That's my 20 seconds.
All right, Ben, would you like to come in there?
Okay, so we're just building a bit of a layer cake here. So, okay, we've got flexibility and reach. I would say, obviously, you've got to understand your customer requirements, and understand the ecosystem in which they're operating, and understand how you can add value to them and what sort of value they're looking for. So, flexibility, reach, plus customer understanding.
Thank you. And Stuart?
This is not fair because my notes say flexibility, customer focus. I then go on to talk about niche. I think it's important that we all have our own niche and space in which to play, whether it's a managed service for the enterprise or whether it's security where we play. I think we all need to offer more than just connectivity. It's that consultation type approach that Graham talked about a little bit earlier. And crucially, I think the ability to scale. We're all looking for the next unicorn. If we're lucky enough to land one, we need to be able to accompany through their journey and scale as they scale.
Thank you. And very unfairly, Amy, if you've got anything to add to our growing list.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, it's a very long list already. I would say it's important to help the customer to achieve the ROI that they're looking for, and that's where we come in as long-term technology partners, because IoT applications, it's not a short-term project. So I think we need to work closely with enterprises to help them achieve ROI, and that's probably more than 20 seconds, so I'll stop there.
Okay, no, well done, well done. Very unfair if you're not the first to put the view forward. So I'd like to just turn to a couple of the panel questions. And the first one I'd like to cover off is, what is the role that network slicing is expected to play, particularly as it becomes available in 5G? What's the reality and what sort of timing are we looking at? I won't be as unfair to point that question at a particular individual, but I'll invite comments from anyone who would like to express a view on this issue.
Network slicing, I'll jump in on that one. I mean, it's a very, very attractive concept. Realistically, it's very, very difficult to deliver. particularly for the mobile operators. I don't really understand how a network slice could be provided with local connectivity. I think we're going to see an awful lot more private LTE development in private LTE before we see anything around network slicing, particularly on 5G, of course.
Yeah, yeah. We haven't discussed 5G in great detail, and it is a subject that we're picking up in the new year and looking at 5G and IoT. So the second question is, what could be done to achieve local pricing for connectivity in the IoT market, especially in emerging markets? So anyone want to jump in there?
The only way to do it is either commit to very, very large volumes if you want multiple network, or buy a single SIM locally. If you want local SIM pricing, probably the simplest way is to go off and buy a local SIM in that country. That's the brutal reality of roaming access, unless you're able to get, if it's an emerging market, unless you're able to get an eSIM solution. It may or may not be available depending on how emerging and where the markets are. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. The other one that we're looking at is the move towards private cellular networks following recent spectrum auctions, and now that's affecting the IoT connectivity market, which I think we've covered a little bit in one of the previous answers, unless anyone's got anything to add to that.
Well, the only thing I'd add to that, Andrew, is obviously the likes of Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, etc. are going to be, they are interested in that market. And I think the issue is, are they going to risk, kind of creating a little bit of frisance with their network operator customers by potentially, getting into their territory. But I think the NEPs definitely are going to be big players in the private LTE and private network market and private 5G market.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
I think, yeah, if I can just jump in there as well, Andrew. I think, there are many examples of use cases where the need to seamlessly roam on and off the private network onto the public network is essential. So I think in this case, enterprises will be looking to CSPs to provide that seamless transition between the public and private network, and the ability to scale that model as well.
Thank you, Amy. So that kind of draws us to a close. There are lots of topics that we covered in the research report that the people on this call have responded to in great detail, and you can find those reading the report if you haven't read it already. As I mentioned at the start, it is downloadable from the MEF website, and we do welcome feedback on that report. So it remains for me to say a very big thank you to the panelists that have made time available today to discuss these issues and for contributing to the research. I'd like to thank the people listening in, and please do come back to us. I know there are a couple of questions that we've simply run out of time to cover today, but we can look at those offline and see if we can best answer those. So again, thank you to you all, and goodbye.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Andrew. Bye.
Goodbye.